Okay, so I'm going to try to explain something fairly complex in my own way, and that's probably going to end up in disaster, but I have to do it anyway. So I've been watching this 2 hour long video between Lawrence Anton and Michael and Simone Collins, who are apparently the face of pronatalism. Apparently, they're the self-proclaimed face of not antinatalism. That's Lawrence Anton, but of pronatalism. I didn't realize how popular they were until CBC did a feature on them, and they're like these kind of eccentric parents with 4 kids, and they do very eccentric things with their kids, like nothing in the realm of abuse or anything, but just just very strange ways of raising them and housing them and things like that. So I thought all of that was very interesting, and it's especially interesting the way the CBC portrayed them. I don't know what the CBC's take is on pronatalism exactly, but it's almost akin to the way they treat antinatalists, which is in this kind of strange category of people, right, who say strange things and think strange concepts and have these weird ideas about population. But anyway, Michael and Simone Collins kind of really interested in me in that 2 hour long conversation with one thing. The whole conversation is very, it's packed filled with like all sorts of stuff, and like it's a lot to go through, but one thing stuck out at me, and it was Michael Collins' take on the interest of beings, particularly the interest of beings that don't exist. So in his books, I don't think he thinks anybody doesn't exist. I think he thinks in some weird way that everybody already exists. Even if they don't exist, they exist. And this is, I know that sounds kind of like stupid and rambly, but a lot of people who try to go against antinatalism make the mistake of thinking that people that don't exist actually do exist. So they assign interest to people that don't actually exist. Because I've watched other interviews with Michael Collins, and he's said things like, what would your child think if the reason you didn't have them is because you wanted to spend money on expensive vacations? And it's like, well, to put it simply, the child wouldn't think anything because the child doesn't exist. So if you want to go spend your money on expensive vacations, the child doesn't care. It doesn't exist, right? But he places this kind of like moral reference point on this child that doesn't exist as if they do exist. In any case, he tries to remedy all this, and I'm not speaking in chronological order here, but he tries to remedy this by talking about a series of potentialities of non-existent people. So I can't remember if he was counting from the moment the sperm meets the egg, but he was saying, but for convenience sake, I'll just start from there. He thinks that from the moment a sperm meets the egg, we can't, and he's right in thinking that we can't really tell at which point consciousness enters that body, that fetus or that potential person. We can't tell. So why not, according to him, assign interests to every point in that developmental process, in which he calls a series of potentialities. So at any point, just to explain again, at any point in that developmental process, each point has a potential that, is different from the other potentials, but it's still a potential of having interest at each point in that developmental process. So and because we can't tell exactly when consciousness enters those points, those potentials, those potentialities, why not just, for safety's sake, I guess, assign interests to each point along that developmental line? So, there's debate about this, and it's been raging in the US, especially when it comes to abortion, right? At what point in development, in human in embryology, does a fetus become conscious and aware of pain and can feel and experience things, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people, I think Benatar places the point at which a fetus will experience pain or is conscious is at 24 weeks or 23 weeks, I can't remember. But It's a huge debate raging, right? But anytime before that, a fetus can't feel pain, so therefore it's okay to abort them. It's, there's no harm being done. But Michael Collins says that, well, there's gonna be, we can't say for sure, so why not just assign interest to every stage in development? And when I keep using the word interest too, and what I mean by interest is basically agency, a kind of moral agency, a kind of interest in continuing to exist and things like that. So how do I want to attack this? Forgive me for biting off more than I can chew, but how do I want to attack this? And hopefully I'm explaining this well. But how do I want to attack this? Well, I guess maybe with an example. So I live under an air traffic route. So there's planes flying over my house all the time. At each stage in that flight, there is a potential for a plane to come crashing down into my house. But I don't sit in my room with a helmet on because it's just something that won't happen. It could happen, but I mean, why do I go about my day planning for a plane to crash into my house? I'm right below an air traffic route, and why even end there, right? Even if I wasn't under an air traffic route, a plane could be flying miles away, and for some freak reason, just basically come crashing down into my house, right? The series of potentialities just keeps going on and on and on. At some point, you have to draw a line, right? Science can help us draw those lines when it comes to embryology. Science could, say, well, at 24 weeks, the brain is fully connected to the spine and all this stuff, and we can feel pain and things like that. Science could help in that. But I mean, but forgetting science, we have to draw the line somewhere. I mean, we can't live our lives based on potentialities, right? So why assume that, I'm going to sit in my room and prepare for an airplane crash just because there's a potential for it. It's inconvenient and it doesn't make any sense. Now, in that same interview between Lawrence Anton and the Collins, they brought up a concept that I'm kind of vague and still trying to work my way through, and that's basically the idea that, well, what about the interest that people that will be, antinatalists, we make a choice not to have children, but we know that people are going to come into the world. So there's interest of people that will come into the world, that will come into existence. So how does that square with Michael Collins' potentialities, right? It's kind of like the same thing. We have to be good stewards of the earth because people will come into existence and they don't exist, but they will. And, so we're assigning interest to things that don't exist. But I think maybe, I know there's something there that doesn't work out. And I think what it might be is general interest compared to specific interest. So, it has to do with the consciousness of the individual that doesn't exist and the consciousness of the individual that will exist. I think the consciousness of the individual that will exist is more generalized and it's non-specific to a specific consciousness. It's just, we know humans need a certain amount of oxygen, a certain amount of water, a certain amount of this and that to survive, and we're kind of good stewards of the earth in order to bring these general requirements into good standing for when people come into existence. But I think when we're talking about the potentialities of specific people, I'm getting lost now, but I think when we're talking about a specific consciousness, we're talking about specific things that are specific to an individual life, like their relationships and their specific. But I'm getting lost on that one. So I'm going to end it there. Wow, that's yeah. So I'm still working through that video and I'm going to watch it again. The interest of people that don't exist because according to Michael Collins, if we're taking in potentialities of things, then we're taking in potentialities, as he himself calls out, like, of people that don't exist. Like, I mean, we should be preparing for, on this earth, we should be preparing for trillions of people to come into existence because they just have potentials, right? And if we're going to treat potentials as genuine, tangible interests, then we should be preparing for all sorts of things, including my airplane example, right? We should be constantly vigilant about everything that has any sort of potential. And maybe I'm getting lost, because maybe when it comes to embryology, that's very specific and it means something very specific that I'm not getting right now. But that's how I'm working through it. Anyway, hopefully that caps off what I'm trying to say about potential and potentialities, and, you know, in the context of Michael Collins and Lawrence Anton and their conversation. But I also want to talk about antinatalism and what kind of potential antinatalism has. And I'm not trying to confuse the topic, but it's funny how the two just kind of come together under the banner of potentialities, right? I think most antinatalists don't believe that there's going to be a wide acceptance of antinatalism. Most antinatalists knowingly work under the banner of, well, it's just antinatalism has a potential to, you know, to influence birth, influence, you know, population, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we kind of have to live this kind of dual life. One in, and I'm not speaking for all antinatalists. I'm nobody, right? But I'm saying, if I may, right? I think antinatalists have to live a dual life because of this potentiality, right? I'm not trying to confuse issues here, but we have to live this dual life because of what could be because of antinatalism, you know, in terms of the end of the human species, however you want to take that as an antinatalist, and basically what actually will be, which is more likely, and that is a world without antinatalism, where population will just, you know, ride the waves, right? Go up and down and maybe expand, maybe contract. But most people will never accept antinatalism. It's just the reality of the world. So we have to live this, antinatalists have to live this dual life between just this potential of antinatalism that we kind of constantly argue for and fight for, but also knowing that it's never going to happen. Like, it will never be accepted by a few people, maybe, but not everybody. And we have to come up with two different theories of the way things are, right? No, I'm not saying everybody has to. Like, I mean, a lot of people walk around without any real theory about the world or anything like that. But I'm saying antinatalists specifically, if you're going to start talking about the world, it's as if you have to kind of plan for antinatalism, but then also kind of deal with the world as it is. And sometimes those two things can come clashing together. And one of the points where I've noticed that those two things come crashing into each other is capitalism. So most antinatalists that I've interacted with online, they don't like capitalism, and it has to do because of its kind of expansionist kind of model, right? You know, bigger markets and higher profits and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of antinatalists don't like capitalism, but the way I've kind of been molded through all my reading and all that stuff, and through an understanding of different political and social systems, is that capitalism has worked better than any other system. Socialism, you know, I know it's a political system, blah, 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 but like, I mean, socialism has generally crashed where capitalism has succeeded. And there's many examples. There's South Korea, Venezuela is an example of where communism or socialism has failed. You know, there's African socialism and the way they're trying to break out of that mold now. So there's many examples where capitalism has proven itself to work better than socialism, and I personally believe capitalism works better It's not perfect, and it constantly needs revision when new technologies come out, and you have to revise the way it works and who benefits and how they benefit, et cetera, et cetera. So I do understand there's problems with it, but I think generally it's a better system of managing human interactions than socialism, which is more top down and et cetera, et cetera. But capitalism comes into conflict with antinatalism in a general sense. I'm not saying every antinatalist is anti-capitalist, but it generally comes into a clash. But does the clash matter? Because antinatalism is never going to happen. It might influence a few people, it might influence some ideas, but it's never going to happen. So you have to have this like dual theory of the world, right? And I find that that's where I'm not going to say I come into conflict necessarily, but I do notice that those two things don't agree with each other, right? Both on my end and other people's ends. So that's pretty much where I want to leave it off. Potentialities, it's the theme, right? Take that however deeply you want to take it or however shallowly you want to take it. But that's sort of my theme for today. Potentialities. Anyway, that's about it. Bye.